Hey everybody, welcome back. We are going to continue our X-ray journey. We thought we were done, but all we did was finish the basics of X-ray. We are now going to get into something that's a little bit more specific. X-ray has a very special, I'm not even sure what to call it. So they basically sell two products. They sell X-ray, which is the tool that most people know. Then they have another tool called X-ray Enterprise that has a couple more bells and whistles. And so this next four, I should speak correctly, these next four videos are going to be all about Xray Enterprise and some of the functionalities there. But this particular video is going to be focused on Xray Enterprise for Jira Cloud. The next video, we're going to talk about the same thing, but for data center. So make sure you hit the subscribe button, drop a like, and let's go ahead and jump into today's session. Again, welcome back, everybody. Happy to have you all here. We did pass. I do have good news. We did pass the X-ray, just again, the regular vanilla X-ray certification. I got an 87%. I wasn't really sure how I was going to fare with it. Some of those questions were like, oh man, I did this way too long ago. And so I'm just glad we were able to pass, and we're good there. So we're squared away with X-ray at that point. Now I just need to do these next four classes, take another test, and then I'm good. And then our partner relationship or status is going to be good, and we're just going to have to figure out how to sell enterprise or X-ray to customers. So if you're interested, hit us up down below, releaseteam.com. All right, let's learn a little bit about Xray Enterprise. So we want to understand Xray Enterprise features and capabilities, understand the Xray test case designer and learn how to use it, and then understand Xray test case versioning. I should note, I've never used Xray Enterprise. I do or have worked with a team that did have Xray Enterprise. And so my understanding is that there's a couple of more capabilities that are extra that you just simply don't get in the regular version of Xray. And I think the versioning is one of them, but we'll jump into it and hopefully discover that in these trainings here. All right, so we got the Xray Enterprise overview. We got our test case designer and then some test case versions. So before you begin, this course will learn about exclusive Xray Enterprise features. And so before you begin, make sure you have the correct licensing in place to access these features. So what is Xray Enterprise? It's the next level of enterprise quality management, a way for you to unlock quality with scale, speed, and proficiency. With Xray Enterprise, you'll be able to work faster and smarter with optimized test cases that ensure optimal coverage, trigger automation directly from Xray, with the click of a button, so even non-technical users can get in the game. Have an enterprise support experience by optimizing your systems and ensuring that everyone is in the company makes the most out of your tools. So imagine your team working faster, testing less, and covering more, all while delivering the highest quality software. And so with Xray Enterprise, that's no longer a dream. That's what we're going to be able to do. So it looks like there's 6 main things, although these slides look a little out of date. But there's 6 main features that we get. So number 1, we get a test case designer. This is going to generate optimized tests that vary to ensure 100% requirement coverage. We're going to be able to trigger remote jobs. This is important. Sometimes your jobs are going to be somewhere else, like in your CI/CD pipelines. So this is going to allow you to trigger remote jobs from within Xray to execute automated tests. We have test case versioning. Save as many test versions as you want for full traceability. You may make new discoveries. You may need to go back in time to an older version of a test. And so this is going to allow you to save it, which is not available in the regular version of Xray. So you want to keep that in mind, that this is only for Xray Enterprise. We also do get Enterprise support. So 24/7 support, faster SLAs, feature voting, power, plus 2 times yearly system checkups. You get unlimited storage. This one's very important too. This is one of the big limitations that I see a lot of teams hit. Because you're creating so many artifacts and you're capturing stuff in regular Xray, right? Maybe you're doing videos or screencasts or something of that nature to capture your defects. Well, that information takes up space, and you only get 50 gigabytes in the regular versions of Xray. So Enterprise will give you unlimited storage. And then a coming soon, again, not sure how these how old these slides are, so this might have actually come out already, but it allows users to define test plans with JQL query or a filter. So how do you get Xray Enterprise? Well, it's available for Jira Data Center and Cloud. Xray requires an active Xray core license. So this is very particular. This is where costs get a little bit more expensive, because you don't only need to just buy Xray, it's a requirement, right? So you have to buy both Xray core, which is, again, all the videos that we have on this channel that we've been streaming for a few weeks now, Plus, you got to buy this enterprise, and it ain't cheap, folks. It ain't cheap. So users must purchase Xray and Xray Enterprise separately. I wouldn't say separately. I think separately is not the right word, but you need to buy both. You just can't buy Xray Enterprise. You need to buy both. Test Case Designer features available for 10 users and has unlimited view only for all users matching your Jira size. Let's see. We got an enterprise or learning path for Xray. So it's going to include all the standard features of Xray. And if you're new to Xray, we advise you to learn all that stuff. But we already covered all that. So we're going to go ahead and get out of here and go to the next module. And we are now going to go into the Test Case Designer. These points are awesome, but they take up a lot of real estate. Okay, so let's understand the theory of Test Case Designer. So why do we use advanced testing techniques? So to answer this question, let's first illustrate the main challenge. Testing everything once or test everything. Neither is a realistic option. In most situations, we need a strategy somewhere in the middle. So why can't we test everything? Well, in this simple mortgage application processing example, 9 variables, 3 values each, there are nearly 20,000 possible tests, 27 times 27 times 27. Anybody remember your, what was it, NPC or something like that? Your combinations, permutations, all that stuff. Ooh, this is taking me back to math that I didn't even remember remembering. So hopefully this is all the math that we have to deal with today. But as you can see, there's way too many possible scenarios, right? Most of the real world systems are so much more complex, which pushes the number of possible tests to like the millions. And so we can't test features in isolation either. I have been a victim of this. We've tried to test things in isolation, folks. When you have a system of systems, bad things will happen. You do not. You do not want to be testing in isolation. Most failures are reintroduced or are induced by single factor faults or by the interaction of 2 factors, with progressively fewer failures induced by interactions between 3 or more factors. So things get progressively harder. So when you have more than 3 or 4 inputs, like those are going to be the really, really hard ones to find. So what's the best approach? Combinatorial. I did not know that was a word. Test design. Combinatorial testing, a black box test technique in which test cases are designed to exercise specific combinations of values of several parameters. It is the application of the mathematical methods in software testing to efficiently generate combinations of parameters that affect the behavior of the system and its outputs. It can be applied to configuration testing, input parameter testing, or a combination of both. So why use combinatorial? Wow, that is just a word that I did not know existed at all. Average results from 10 published pilot projects across a diverse range of software testing, which tells us that test execution efficiency, bugs found per tester, equals to 2.4 times more. Testing thoroughness, the defects found overall, is 13% more, and the test design time to select and document tests is 36% less. Good numbers. So obviously we want to be looking at this special form of testing, which I've never heard of before. All right, let's go into the Test Case Designer overview. So what is the Test Case Designer? So Test Case Designer is a combinatorial test design optimization tool that allows users to quickly generate tests from a model of variation ideas of their application or process. It is used to generate tests that will maximize critical interaction coverage in as mathematically few scenarios as possible. One of the main features of the Test Case Designer is that we hit 100% requirement coverage in fewer tests. So we can create optimized tests varied to ensure optimal requirement coverage, eliminate gaps in the test coverage, and turn test scenarios into automated scripts. We can find defects 2 times faster than hand-select the test and systematically over the application's critical interactions. Enables optimized in-sprint automation, rapidly create clear and consistent test steps that leverage BDD, behavior-driven development. And so here's a little term and some concept, right? We're going to have our Xray test in our test model. There's going to be some scripts that are going to be used by our scenarios. And so our test model is going to then have some rules and values and parameters. So it's very interesting here. Our test model is an abstraction of a focused use case that we aim to test. A test model is created for a specific scope, for example, book a flight. And a test model contains parameters, flying from, class, etc. Values from those parameters, for example, India, business, etc. And then rules, flying from, flying to, cannot have the same value. Raise your hand, folks, if you're testers. I think it requires a special kind of skill to test stuff. When using Xray Test Case Designer, it all starts with your test model. You can copy assets from the sample test models project to help you get started. Parameters are the ideas or factors to be tested. You can consider them to be the steps in the flow that you define as the model scope. For example, actions involved in booking a flight. Parameters often refer to the UI input variables, but they can also represent the environment, device configurations, API requests, and response fields, etc. Some examples of parameters for a booking flight app could be direct from the UI, class flying from, flying to, etc. Configuration, browser, device, version, etc. Environment, in a broad sense, user type, access timing, etc. We will focus on the simpler ones from the UI in this course. Not all flow parameters are relevant to a given test model. Let's talk about values. Values are a different way in which a parameter can vary. Some examples of values for a booking flight apps could be class of business, a browser of Google Chrome, and then a user type of no membership. Then we have rules. Rules allow us to apply restrictions as we may not be interested in having all combinations of variables. We can use rules to define which parameters or values should never be tested together and enforce values that should be tested together. And then we have scenarios. We use this term to define the optimized data table with the combinations of parameter values. It's similar to data sets used in Xray. Parameter names are column headers, and each row represents a scenario or a test case. We often use these interchangeably. That handles one iteration of data variety. And then, of course, we can't forget about scripts. While scripts focus on data that will be used for our tests, scripts provide the actual context so that testers or automation frameworks know how, where to use that data. More specifically, scripts provide the ability to define actions and expected results in a data-driven template manner. Scripts can be geared towards their either manual or automated execution. All right, on to the next one. Okay, this one's a small one, 4 slides. First steps with the test case designer. So you're going to want to create your account and your first model. So test case designer leverages a single sign-on with your Xray instance, so you can simply click the menu link to get into the tool. I like how they're using and giving me Jira Data Center, even though this is for a cloud. Once on the landing page, click the new test model link in the left navigation panel to create your first draft. And here's a simple web application. So throughout the course, we will work with a simplified web app that handles flight bookings and will limit the scope to only to the UI. And so how do we use a test case designer? We're going to define our parameters and values, specify the system rules, generate optimized scenarios, analyze the test coverage, create scripts, and then integrate with Xray. I feel like the arrow should have gone that way, but maybe not. We'll see. I'm sure we're going to get deep into it. And I do believe there's a dedicated module where we're going to cover all this. What am I looking for? Test case editor thing. All right, let's understand the parameters. So we're going to have parameters and their values are inputs for our test model. So we're going to have our parameters of flying from, and we can have like the India, the Philippines, the United States. Where are we flying to? The United States, Philippines, and India. What kind of classes do we have? Coach, business, first class. How many adults? 1, more than 1. Children, 0, 1, more than 1. Environmental variation. So these are just some examples of what could be a parameter. So your hardware configurations, your channel, software configurations. We can have user type of variations. Like, do we have an admin? Do we have a user? Do we have an agent? Maybe some personas. Who's a power user, a newbie, a typical user. And then we can have usage variations, right? Like actions that they can take and data. Hendrix variables, parameters, examples. From the book, explore it. So we can have countable things, relative positions, files, storage, format, size, geographical locations, depth, timing, frequency, duration, input, and navigation. So deciding what to include as parameters and values in your test case designer test model will be the most important part of the entire test design process. Being able to identify the best parameters will determine the effectiveness of your test model. So how do you determine a parameter? Deciding which ideas to include in your models and deciding how to include those ideas in your models. So selecting the best parameters for your test model. You need to classify parameters based on system impact. Parameters that won't impact your system, leave them out of the model. Parameters that will obviously impact your system, definitely include them. And then parameters that are likely to impact your system but are not straightforward, you can basically leave those off. So it won't impact how the system works. Assuming that you want to generate a set of positive tests to confirm that the application works as it should, creating flight reservations successfully, you can safely omit the parameters below from the model of your system under test you enter into the test case designer. So in this case, we will always click the search button and confirm the reservation so that there are no options for the steps and it has no impact on the outcome. Impactful and obvious. Assuming you always want to generate a set of positive tests to confirm that the application works as it should, creating flight reservations successfully, you can quickly include the obvious, more straightforward testing ideas inside the test case designer. Typically, dropdowns or set of radio buttons with limited selections belong to this category. In this case, we have only 3 options for class. Likely impact, but less obvious. There will be also critical testing ideas that should be included as test case designer parameters, but are not as straightforward in the model too. So typically these elements are like freeform tags, fields, and lengthy dropdowns that require extra thought model in your test case development. So the inclusion limitations should be driven by the business rule thresholds or the technical domain knowledge. Again, we're all just trying to decide which parameters to include. So the higher the likelihood that the variation has impact on the system, the more likely you want to include it. And the less likely, the more likely you don't want to include it. So this is more of a balancing game, and it's a little bit more of an art. You get to decide what makes sense for you and your organization, because you don't want to be able to test everything, right? It's just not going to be possible. And so you want to be very prescriptive as to what you test. So when selecting the best parameters for your test model, only focus on your system inputs. Do not include outcomes or expected results. And once you get more experience with TCD, we have tips for handling those 2 aspects. Now let's talk about how do you determine your values. So the next step is to determine the variations of your parameters. So we have descriptive values. You need to select how they vary and which are the most relevant. So we have number values. And then parameters can vary as descriptive number or range values. Defining value examples. So we have a drop-down that has certain values from 1 to X. And as you can see, this is less effective. Setting all numeric possible values for adults will increase the number of tests in an ineffective way. Because if it works for 1, it's going to work for 2, and it's going to work for 3, and then 5, and 10, 11, right? When you're just changing one variable, the test is less effective because it should yield the same result. Defining descriptive values will decrease the number of tests, but also decrease the specificity and variety. And then using range values will generate fewer tests and guarantee better coverage of options. So again, it's more of an art, folks. You get to pick and choose what makes the most sense for you and your organization. If your model includes a long list of values, you are in danger of generating way more tests than needed. The value expansion feature can be dramatically reduced in the number of tests generated in these situations. It is a good way to handle nice-to-have variations, but keep in mind that these scenario generation algorithms does not guarantee the coverage of value expansions. So ways to define parameters and values. So once you have thought about what to include in your model and how the parameter screen and the TCD offers 2 modes to accomplish the first step. So we have the standard view that allows you to edit your parameters one by one. And then we have the bulk view that enables you a faster way to make changes in several parameters at the same time, but does not allow you to create value expansions. So just keep that in mind. You can also import files for your test model. So along with the manual creation, Xray Test Case Designer allows you to import all types of details you might have in your model. You can import from Excel or a mind map or an outline. And when importing, please ensure you have the correct format. All right, I think we're gonna now go look at a video. We're gonna go look at a video and we're gonna see what happens. Let me pop down here. This little box, folks, if they can make it go away, that would be awesome. Okay, let's make this big. Let's hit play and let's see what they're doing. So we're gonna go in here, create a new test model. You're gonna give it a name. That's a critical first step. You're gonna give your model a name. In this case, we're gonna call it Clothes Shop Model. We're going to leave the rest alone, so no projects, no importing of any files. Click on Create. And now we're going to essentially add a new parameter or not. Yes, maybe. Yes, looks like it. So we're going to click on New Parameter, and we're going to define a new parameter by giving it a name. In this case, we're going to call it Size. And then we get to define those parameter values. So what values are in here? So typical like small, medium, large, extra large, extra, extra large, right? the typical things that you would put for t-shirts. We can always go in there and create a new one. Now we're going to do colors of our shirts, right? So what colors do we have? Yellow, green, red, purple, orange, whatever shirt colors. I'm a big fan of black, so I would probably just have black. Okay, so we just define, and then we just keep making them, right? So we have female shirts, male shirts, youth shirts, non-binary, whatever you want. You can define all those, and we just keep adding our parameters, right? So now we're going to add type. So probably like unisex, or V-shape, right? There's a bunch of different types of styles, sweaters, shorts, things of that nature. So we can see our variables there, and then we can go over to this bulk view, and we can see that it's possible to edit, so we can add more values if we needed to. But I think the problem was adding more. There's some limitation here. Okay, let's talk about specific system rules. So section of rules. Rules allow us to apply some restrictions as we may not be interested in having all combination of variables. So we have constraints used to identify values that should never or should only be tested together. And then we have forced interactions. Force high priority combinations of values to be included in your scenarios if they exceed the algorithm strength. Constraints. So when applying constraints, a user is setting up the test model to take into account the business rules about the value relationships across the scenarios. Regardless of the constraint type, you can see it on the right side. The goal is to identify value pairs that should be excluded either because the system prohibits them or because we don't want them. And then setting these relationships will ensure that your models generate only valid scenarios given your scope. Let's talk about invalid pairs as an example. So P1 equals A will never be paired to P2 equals D. A flight cannot have the same departure as a destination. That makes sense. Single bound pairs. So P1A must be paired with P2 equals D. So where there is more than one child, the ticket must be in coach class. That's an unfair rule. What if you have very rich parents that want to take all their children in first class? Mutually bound. So we can do this kind of in showing all the different paths that you can do. And then like a real example, right? Business class is exclusive flights to the USA, and there are no other such class options. Advanced constraints editor. You can implement the constraint via the click method in the standard editor or the syntax method in the advanced one. So we have invalid pair, single bound pair, and mutually bound pair. Please refer to the usage button in the top right corner for basic instructions. Forced interactions. The goal of forced interactions as opposed to the constraints is to identify the value of combinations that should be included in the scenario suite. Why do we need to specify inclusion? In a two-way set of tests, test case designer's algorithm guarantees that all pairs of values will appear in at least one test. However, sometimes there are critical requirements which include more than two values. Instead of increasing the coverage strength to three-way or four-way interactions, we can use forced interactions to surgically manage the scenario suite. Let's try adding this forced interaction inside of our test model. So flying to the United States, flying to India, class equals first. So then the test case designer will now generate that this specific scenario appears in the generated table, and we'll prioritize this as the first row. See what this looks like in the scenario screen inside your test model. So let's go look at these. Let's go look at an example, because some of these are really hard to understand, but when you look at the video, it's a little bit clear. So we go to there's a dedicated constraint section, and basically we get to say yes or no, right? We get to say this can go with this one, this cannot go with this one. So if you remember those arrows things, we're basically defining what all these little things mean, right? And so this is kind of cool that it's very interactive and very easy to set up, where you can configure, all right, what are going to be the different constraints that we have? These are going to be possible. These are not going to be possible. And it's very intuitive. I kind of like this. So I think the hardest part is kind of just coming up with all the constraints and then kind of figuring out the relationship so that you use the right one at the right place at the right time. Let's see, we are 41% of the way there. So we are almost halfway. This one's an 8 slider here. So let's jump into generating optimized scenarios. So scenarios represent the combination of parameter values. Each row is unique, and there is never redundancy in the generated data table unless you intentionally force it. So understanding the strength of combination. So the number of rows in your scenarios table is determined in large part by the coverage setting. You can select the strength by deciding which type of interaction you want. Important, mixed strength is a risk-based option that gives more flexibility. So while we provide the one-way interactions option, we do not recommend it based on the nature of defect triggers we discussed earlier. The primary use case for it is when TCD is leveraged only for scripting efficiency. Testing every pair of parameter values. For the statistical best bang for your buck, you should test every pair of parameter values in your system at least once. In the first 3 of 11 scenarios, we can see pairs highlighted on the left being covered. Testing every triplet of values, the three-way interactions. If you're more worried about the quality than the efficiency, you should test every triplet of parameter values in your system at least once. In the first 3 of the 31 scenarios, we can see example triplets highlighting on the left being covered. Test Case Designer can actually go all the way up to covering every 6-way interaction in its scenarios. Although we hear only NASA uses 6-way testing for mission critical space systems. I would hope so. Now let's go look at a video, and I think we're going to be almost 50% done after this video. All right, this is a quick one. We're going to go to scenarios. You basically determine this was a one-way, so you get to choose which way scenario. Remember, we have from 1 all the way to 6. So we're going to select 2-way, and then it's going to auto-generate this based on those constraints that we had earlier. So it's going to cover 40 possible 2-way interactions in just 16. And we can go to 3-way, and when you look at all the options available here, you can see just all the different permutations of what's possible and what you can take. So that's really interesting. And then you can go higher to that mixed one. Next up, if this thing decided to load, we are a little stuck here. Not sure what's going on. I'm not able to hit the button anymore. Come on, you're making me look bad in front of everybody. All right, finally it loaded. Okay, we are 50% of the way through. We have 2 slides here, free scenarios. So free scenarios, you can freeze scenarios to ensure that specific value combinations do not change even when you are updating your model. If you do that, the entire scenarios table will be saved as a forced interaction. And so freezing scenarios is usually not desirable as it will likely result in less efficient counts as your test model evolves. Freezing should only be done if there's an important reason to preserve these exact combinations and should typically be undone before the next major iteration item. All right, let's go take a look at analyzing the test coverage. Understanding coverage. So Xray Test Case Designer, that TCD, provides 2 different visualizations to understand interactions coverage for your scenarios. So Code Matrix, the Test Case Designer enables you to see the aggregate pairwise coverage achieved under running a certain number of tests. It helps answer how much testing is enough for my project. You can also determine whether or not certain interactions have been covered yet in a given subset. All of this is possible thanks to the coverage matrix. So take a look at it inside of your test models. You can hover over any square for the tooltip. Green squares are value pairs that have been covered after the first X test. Red squares are value pairs that have not been covered after the first X test. And then black squares are any constraints that you have added that are impossible to test for. They will always be black. Coverage graph. Performs a similar role, but shows the aggregate coverage percentage for any interaction strength. After running the first 12 tests, we will achieve 80.9% coverage in the 3-way. Take a look inside of our test models. Hover your cursor, so apparently I can't see it, but when you hover your cursor, you're going to be able to see the percent complete and stuff. So that's pretty cool. Okay, let's talk about creating scripts. Let me go full screen here. Scripts provide the ability to define actions and expected results in a data-driven template manner. They can be applicable to either manual or automated execution. So how do you create a script for a manual execution? In the manual section, the test case designer includes the functionality to add steps and expected results that connect the optimized data table. You would write the content as you typically do, except step syntax is data-driven, In the flying to text box, type flying to with the parameter name value changing from test to test. Expected results utilize the when then statements and support parameter references in the then section. Only one manual script template is created per model. Upon export, it will automatically generate as the test cases as you had rows and scenarios. So how to create a script for automated execution. So in the automated section, Test Case Designer includes the functionality to create BDD scripts so that even non-coders can accelerate the automation process. It is a smart gherkin given when then feature file editor that leverages both Test Case Designer, models, elements, parameters, values, generated scenarios, and the gherkin script syntax. It also makes it easier for testers to write consistent data-driven BDD scripts using autocomplete and parameter names. And it automatically generates comprehensive data tables or gherkin steps in one-to-many scripting. Next page, integrate with Xray. So synchronizing with Xray Enterprise. Once optimized scenarios and scripts have been created, inside the Test Case Designer, users can sync optimized tests with Xray Enterprise for test management, for execution, reporting, and tracking. The Xray API is used seamlessly to integrate the two capabilities. Once you are ready, simply navigate to the synchronization capability. And in order for the syncing to occur, you must connect to Jira using your Jira login credentials. Very, very important, folks. When synchronizing, you have two options for your manual or automated execution efforts. If you've created a manual steps under scripts capability, be sure to select these scripts from the dropdown when synchronizing. If you've created gherkin steps under automate, be sure to select that option from the dropdown. And another important thing is currently sync applies only to scenarios in automate. We're currently working on the outline support. And not sure how old this training is, so this might have not be true anymore. Exporting. If the sync option is experiencing difficulties, you can download the file from export Xray dialog. Again, this doesn't look like the cloud interface, so this might just be a repeat of, or when I go over to the data center Monday, it'll probably be the same steps because it looks like they're using an older UI. Test case versioning. This is the only feature that I personally heard of in the past that would cause somebody to need. I had never heard of this TCD. But versioning I have. So test case versioning was one of the most requested features for Xray and is now available in Xray Enterprise. Welcome to capitalism, people. You can create new versions of the same test, allowing you to create a baseline for your test case, mark specific milestones, view all the previous test versions and revert them to a particular version, have multiple versions active and execute them independently, and set a version as default, even when it's not the most recent version. So how to create a new version? Create a new version and set the name. A test version is composed by test specification, test type, dataset, and preconditions. All the information gets stored in the test case version and will be displayed on the test run. When creating a new version, Xray will auto-generate its name based on the latest version name. You can rename it later. I had a team that literally made us buy Xray Enterprise just for this feature. It was quite expensive. Okay, setting the default version here. Enforce a version as the default version. The default version is the one Xray chooses when you create a test run for the test without explicitly specifying a version. You can set any version as the default one. If you want to execute a specific version, you can select the version at the new test execution in the test issue screen. You can also add specific version of a test to an existing test execution, also from the test issue screen. At manage versions, you can view all the previous versions, set a version as default, archive a version to avoid execution, and delete a version. All changes related to the test specification can be viewed at the issue activity. Xray add a new test history tab to enable you to see and filter all changes test by test version. We are almost there, folks. Almost there, 77%. A couple more sections here. Dynamic test plans. Test plans enable you to have better visibility and management over your tests. With Xray Enterprise, you can create static test plans. This means you'll need to explicitly add and update your test to your test plan. But you can also create dynamic test plans, which Xray is going to add and update your tests into a test plan based on the conditions you define later. A dynamic test plan is a test plan that can be using a filter to collect the test cases and is always up to date. With dynamic test plans, we take advantage of the power of JQL. Xray is seamlessly integrated with Jira, So you can add custom fields to your test to later cache them into JQL filter used by the dynamic test plan. But why would we want to use a dynamic test plan? Bart is a tester, and he needs to make sure that all user stories planned at sprint 1 are covered and tested, but at this moment, he has not created all the manual test cases. Bart knows that all tests linked with the user stories plan for sprint 1 need to be part of his test plan, so he creates a dynamic test plan. By having a filter prepared to collect all the tests for sprint 1, Bart just needs to focus on creating the test cases. Easy peasy. Let's look at some examples. Make sure that when you move the test from the current open sprint, use a filter to search for issues on that open sprint. So you're checking for sprint is open. We're going to find anything that's there. And then use a filter created at your test plan. You do not need to filter for issue types because dynamic tests will only add tests to your test plan. That's convenient. Another way you can do this is if you go to a specific project. Again, you don't need to be very specific because it's just going to find all the tests that are in the specific project. Now let's go look at a video on how to actually do this. All right, get rid of this, go on mute, go full screen, and hit play. I'm surprised this one didn't play automatically. So here we are in Jira, and we're just trying to find all the work that is, or all the tests that we're going to pull into our dynamic plan. And so here we have the create button. We're going to create a test plan, and we're just going to call it test plan for open sprints, or the current open sprint. Hit create, and then we're going to go, and what I'm assuming is going to do a little bit of JQuil. So wait for that Xray section to load, click on the action menu button here, click on configure, and that's going to take us to our save filter where we're going to be able to find our open sprint, which is basically show me everything that is in an open sprint. And that's it. Like, it's just going to go get the tests. So there's nothing special you need to do because the test just automatically exists. I'm assuming somebody had to create the test though first so that they could be pulled in. You just don't have to go find them. I guess it's the easiest thing I can describe it as. All right, let's do a quick survey. We got 2 questions here. This was let's give it an 8. These aren't the most exciting of stuff. We're going to do an NA for this. Submit that survey. Hit next. Complete the unit. And then download our cert because we need to tell our boss that we did our job here. And that's it. All right, folks. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. We are going to come back on Monday where we're going to do basically Xray Essentials for Data Center. And then we're going to be doing 2 more trainings. So we got another one for Tuesday, another one for Wednesday. So if you haven't hit the subscribe button now, would be a great time to hit that subscribe button. And then that'll kind of be the end of our Xray journey for now. We are going to jump over to Red Hat probably the week after because we have to go get Red Hat certified over there as well. So hit the subscribe button, folks, and I'll see you on Monday.